What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to make a video talking about what makes Islam Makhachev so good. Islam Makhachev, as we all know, is the UFC lightweight champion. He just beat Dustin Poirier at UFC 302. He also beat Alexander Volkanovski twice at UFC 294 and 84, and he won the belt of Charles Oliveira at UFC 280. But Islam Makhachev is a different breed of fighter, considering he's from Dagestan. He's kind of a big wrestler, but he also has developed a striking game to go along with it. Islam Makhachev is, yes, probably the best wrestler inside the UFC, but is also a top 5 striker in my opinion. Put that all together and you get one of the most amazing fighters inside the UFC. And today I want to break down why Islam Makhachev is an absolute pound for pound fighter in the world and why he should be number one there, but of how he is absolutely one of the most unique fighters the UFC has ever seen. But first, before we jump into the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys are always notified when UFC content releases. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video of why Islam Makhachev is such a unique and amazing fighter. Islam Makhachev is absolutely one of the most skilled fighters in the UFC pound for pound. In my opinion, Islam could beat any single fighter in the UFC pound for pound. And that is a statement that I am 100% confident to make. I know all this John Jones and Dana White stuff is going on, but Islam Makhachev is just that good. If you look at his combination of striking, grappling, and IQ, I kind of want to break down each individual category and talk about why I believe that this is such a prominent thing. But Islam's reign inside the UFC, he's beat some incredible people. He's in his title reign, he's won the belt off Charles Oliveira, beat Volkanovski twice, and beat Dustin Poirier once, and all of those were some incredible fights. He also beat the likes of Bobby Green, Dan Hooker, Arman Sarukian, and a bunch more individuals inside the UFC lightweight division. But I want to start with Islam's wrestling because that is the best thing kind of to go, the best thing that everyone knows Islam for. Islam has a absolutely dominant ground control game, which is something that really allows him to open up in the striking department. Islam's ground game is absolutely suffocating, considering he can go for submissions whenever he wants. He has the submission over Charles Oliveira with that arm triangle. He also has the submission over Dan Hooker, which is that Kimura. He has the submission over Dustin Poirier, which is the Darce choke. Islam has so many different submissions in his bag that he jumps onto incredibly quick. Let's break down that Dustin Poirier scene first. He kind of caught the leg of Dustin Poirier, in which he performed an ankle pick right then after, jumping right on his neck to hit and finish out the Darce choke, which was one of the most impressive performances and just submission attempts I have ever seen inside the UFC. Islam, yes, is a pretty big guy and he is a great wrestler, but he does have an amazing submission game, not like the Brazilians and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but Islam Makhachev is a one-of-a-kind individual, especially with those Darces, those rear naked chokes, and those arm triangles and Kimuras. It is absolutely insane. That Kimura that Islam Makhachev had Dustin Poirier in that first round and finished Dan Hooker in at UFC 268, I believe it was, were some absolutely crazy finishes that he was able to receive. Now, Islam Makhachev being able to control on the ground is something that really allows him to pick off easy rounds. In that first Volkanovski fight, his ground control was obviously apparent against Volk, and he was able to take off very easy rounds, ultimately allowing him to capture that split decision win, or unanimous decision win. I forgot which one it was. But let's move on to the stand-up in that department, because I think Islam Makhachev's stand-up ability is some of the most underrated inside the UFC. I want to first go to that second Alexander Volkanovski fight, where he did condition the body kick to then go upstairs and knock him out with a head kick in one of the most brutal KOs I have ever seen in my life. Islam is so good at picking one spot on your body that he's going to condition over and over and over again. That's what he was doing constantly with that lower body kick. He ended up going high about 2 minutes into the fight, which Volkanovski was expecting a body kick. He was going to block it, and he kind of did this thing which he studied on Volkanovski, which he extends his arms. And if you extend your arms against a big kick to kick from someone's shin, it isn't going to go that well. It could break your arm, but it also could just travel right through your arm and go right to your head, in which it could lead to serious implications down the line, possibly concussions, getting knocked out, and a very absolutely crazy thing to see. But also Islam's his punching power is so critical. He is such an amazing puncher inside the UFC, and he is one of the best strikers, not in his ability to punch, but in mixing up everything in general. Islam is genuinely one of the best fighters inside the UFC on the feet. He's able to stand and trade with some of the best strikers in the UFC. Like I said, that Alexander Volkanovski fight was incredibly impressive. That Dustin Poirier fight, where he was standing on up long periods of time in that bout, which was an incredible thing for me to see, considering that Dustin Poirier had such an advantage on the ground. He was able to stand and trade for so many different so much time, with Poirier ultimately getting the better of him in some of those exchanges, which, like I said, incredibly impressive in my opinion. Now, Dustin Poirier in that Islam Makhachev fight looked really amazing, but in my opinion, Islam Makhachev looked incredibly dominant in that fight. Dustin Poirier wasn't giving up takedowns, he was kind of doing his thing, but Islam Makhachev was going for control time, he was winning the stand-up bout, and that was something ultimately that ended up giving him the fight. The last thing that I want to talk about with Islam Makhachev is that IQ that brings together his wrestling, grappling, and his striking department, which is the best thing that someone can do inside the UFC. One thing I always talk about Dricus du Plessis is that grappling game that he possesses and that striking game not being the best, but the one thing that ties everything together and that is the biggest asset that a fighter can have is knowing when to mix up those different things, knowing when to mix up the strikes, when to shoot a takedown in there, when to catch your opponent off guard, and when your opponent is genuinely lost, to stay composed and to take your time to ultimately get the finish later down the line. Islam is the absolute king of that. In that Charles Oliveira fight, he clipped Oliveira with that left hook, sent him right to the ground. He did not panic and automatically jumped on that arm triangle. That was something absolutely that was essential for for Islam Makhachev to do upon that victory with Charles Oliveira at UFC 280. It was something that Islam was able to keep calm, be able to understand the situation, and be able for his IQ to kick in and really just allow him to take the biggest advantage of that fight, considering the situation and circumstance at hand. Islam's IQ is absolutely insane. We looked at that Dustin Poirier fight in that first round. He had Dustin's back, and he was transitioning to an armbar to ultimately further his position in his Kimura. Islam was on his back, and he was moving kind of towards an armbar submission, which was something that, yes, is very hard to do, especially on someone like Dustin Poirier. But when he was moving to that armbar to gain mount, or kind of off to one side, it was making Dustin Poirier adjust his position that he was currently in. That allowed Islam to quickly transition back to that Kimura, which Dustin Poirier was able to get out of eventually because of a great move that he had. But being able to transfer and continue that position when Dustin Poirier was defending it well was something incredible to see, considering that it came from one of the smartest and most technical fighters the UFC has right now. Ultimately, Islam Makhachev is an absolute maniac of a human being inside that UFC octagon. He is so good, he is so well-rounded, and yet he is a super funny human being in there. And truly, he is an absolute menace in that octagon. He is able to beat the best fighters in the world, and I think he could become champion in the welterweight division right now. I think he could possibly beat some of the middleweights currently in the UFC, but Islam Makhachev's well-rounded nature, his game being so good and just technical, his striking game being on point, being in that Eagle MMA camp with Khabib Nurmagomedov is something that pushes Islam Makhachev every single day to stay disciplined, to stay amazing, and ultimately make him the best fighter in the UFC in my opinion, but also the best version of himself. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please leave a comment down below what you think about this Islam Makhachev, of why he is absolutely so special. Islam is one of the few fighters in the UFC currently who is able to strategically and absolutely mix his striking and his grappling to make an absolute art of the sport. He is absolutely one of the best submission artists. He's got amazing ground control time. He's an amazing striker. There is no deficiency in Islam Makhachev's camp, but probably one of his best assets is that IQ that he possesses, allowing him to tie everything together in an absolutely crazy manner. Islam Makhachev is one of the only fighters in the UFC that I could say could transition pound for pound and win possibly the welterweight title, win a lot of these different fights. He could probably beat some middleweights, like I said. Islam is that good to where, yes, he might be the smaller individual, but that grappling sambo that he presents and that he has is something that is going to ultimately be able to transition in weight classes, and that is why I think that Islam is such a special fighter. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the daily UFC content, and while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys stay updated with the most recent MMA content coming to YouTube media right now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.